So, in today's episode, I'm going to discuss my life in China and compare it to how I lived in my home country of America. This is entirely based on my own personal experiences in the country and should not be taken as a general consensus. Well, I should also point out that my life in America was entirely home based, and as such, any generalizations about social life in America might be somewhat skewed. But I will try to keep everything as broad as possible. Also, because of recent events, my life in China has actually changed. So I will try to include my two viewpoints of my life in China, both before the pandemic and after. So I lived in China from 2014 until now, barring the year 2017 when I lived in Japan. I'll make another video on that experience. I guess my first experience in China is the inefficiency of the transportation system, as I had to wait 4 hours in an airport for a delayed flight. Well, this was a one time experience and not reflective of my experience as a whole. Generally, I've been pretty satisfied with the transportation system here. Certainly, it is better than the system in America, or at least on Long Island, where trains only went east west and buses were few and far between. On Long Island, you needed to have a car, and there was simply no exception for that. Well, I've gotten on pretty well without a car in China, but I suppose I would be happier if I could get one. Although, having a car in America would be far easier than having one in China. Parking is rare here. It's like New York City. You need a permit to park in some places, and in others, you have to pay a fee. Most people here just park on the sidewalk or indeed anywhere they can find a place, but it's really chaotic. And the way people drive here I find very scary and dangerous, and think it actually is better that I don't have a car. I never really liked to drive to begin with, but certainly it does afford much more freedom. Taxis here are relatively inexpensive compared to some countries. Japan, I'm looking at you. Trains, buses, and subways too. Actually, electric scooters or e-bikes are a preferred method of transportation here, but so completely unregulated that they become a hazard for anyone who doesn't have one. Bicycles are here too, but much less common. So, besides one experience, I think my travel experience has been fairly pleasant. Not that I traveled much, but I'll get to that in a moment. I guess my biggest gripe thus far has been how small everything is here. Now, in America, I only knew my home and my father's apartment, which was small but comfortable, and my college dorm experience. I would say that my first apartment here was about as big as my father's apartment, and as such, I was fairly satisfied with it. But that was the biggest place I've lived thus far. My second apartment in Chengdu was about half that size, and my third, even smaller, and it didn't even have a proper Western toilet. Actually, my third apartment in Changzhou was fairly big and comfortable, but when I moved to Jinan, I lived in a shoebox. Then I moved into the school and lived in an even smaller place. As it is now, my current apartment is about as big as my third apartment in Changzhou and comfortable, but not as big as my first apartment here in China. Certainly, I've lived in smaller places, but I do tend to feel a bit cramped here. My whole apartment here is only slightly bigger than my bedroom where I lived in America. Now let me talk about the food here. My original impression was that there would be several Chinese restaurants akin to the same in America, but that is not the case. Chinese food in China is very different to its equivalent in America, and I loved American Chinese food. But the food here, I am not too crazy about. I do love dumplings and hot pot and various other dishes whose names escape me, but for the most part, I eat American fast food. KFC is rampant here, and it's my go to food. There are certainly other foreign foods. Italian food is a bit blasé here and doesn't compare to Italian food in America. Mexican food is a bit of a rarity. Japanese food pales in comparison to its equivalent in Japan. I found a pretty good Indian restaurant in Jinan, but didn't have that experience anywhere else. Other ethnic food I really hadn't partaken in too often. The prices are fairly decent and on par with the equivalent in America, but foreign foods are a bit pricier than Chinese foods. And really good food here, like decent Italian food and the like, are a bit on the expensive side. Most of the food here isn't treated with chemicals, so it's more or less organic. Microwaves are a pretty recent phenomenon in China, so there aren't any real microwavable dinners or such here. I've hardly even used microwaves here, and only really to reheat leftovers. Ovens are also rare here, so baking is pretty much out of the question. All cooking is done on stovetop. I did a fair amount of cooking in Changzhou, but really nowhere else. Mostly I just cook eggs. So for me, dinners are often simple, instant noodle types, and I make sandwiches. You won't really find grape jelly here, but strawberry jam is a fair substitute. Also, maple syrup is not common here, so pancakes are pretty much out. Again, in Changzhou I found a place to get maple syrup, so it wasn't too bad. Some things you can get online, but I haven't really had reason to do so, which is fine because I'm usually out anyway. Which brings me to my next point, paying for things. America is hands down a credit nation, but in China, credit cards are fairly rare. And I've never seen anyone use checks in China. So my early experience with China was as a cash carry nation. But China has slowly shifted away from paper currency in favor of online banking, akin to PayPal, in America. Now, I'm not against online banking, as it is wholly convenient to pay for things without needing to pull out my wallet every time I go out. Since the pandemic, I've gotten into the habit of getting food delivered. I just worry about how doomed the country would be if ever the payment systems got corrupted. Actually, when I lived in Jinan, there were many places that didn't even accept paper currency and could only accept payments via an electronic medium. And that's a bit frightening as well. And when it comes to sending things between people, the China postal system is not the best resource. Instead, there are a few major couriers that will pick up packages and things from your door or nearby location and deliver it to whatever destination you give them. International mail is mainly handled by EMS. Moving services don't really exist here, but basically handled in the same way as delivery services. Money transfers are handled mainly electronically, but there are some services like Western Union and MoneyGram for sending money internationally. Western Union is fairly common, but MoneyGram isn't as common. Bank to bank direct transfers are usually the preferred choice of international money transfer. People here tend to keep to themselves mostly, though foreigners sometimes congregate. I had my best social experiences in my first 2 years here, but after that, not so much. I had no real social experiences in America to speak of. Maybe once or twice going to a bar, but that's about it. But that's just my experience. Here, really, it depends on the place. Chengdu has been friendlier than most places I've been. Changzhou, a little less so. But mostly, I've just kept to myself. Though I spent a good deal of time with my lady Yui, and sometimes went out with my coworkers. I would say that activities here are on par with those in America. Bars and clubs are frequent, though I tend to shy away from such things. I don't really drink and I don't dance. I guess the biggest activity here is karaoke, the Chinese equivalent of which is KTV. There are many such establishments here. I often went to KTV in Chengdu with my coworkers, and in Changzhou I went by myself. They offered some accompaniment there for a small fee, so no judging. There are some small amusement arcades, but I tend to shy away from them. They tend to be a bit pricey here. Contrary to what many people might believe, China is actually very clean. They have street sweepers to clean the sidewalks and sprayer trucks that clean the streets with water pressure. Trash receptacles are fairly common, but recycling, however, is not so strictly enforced. Another thing worth noting is that legal, legal authorities such as lawyers are not as common here, as most disputes are dealt with by the authorities. Most people know what is expected of them and so act accordingly. How has my life changed since the pandemic? Well, travel has been heavily restricted, so I haven't been able to go as many places as I would have liked. Though, to be honest, I never really traveled much in America. It is a bit annoying, as travel is one thing I particularly enjoy. And in my experience, people tend to keep to themselves more now than before, enveloped in their online social media and phone games. Maybe there is an anti foreigner sentiment, at least that is my impression. So, since then, I really haven't spent time with anyone. Overall, my experience in China isn't much different than that in America. If you have any other questions about life in China, feel free to leave them in the comments. Also, like, subscribe, and share this video. And if you are so inclined, feel free to support me on my Patreon. Link below. Thank you again, and see you next time.